any questions from this morning? Any problems? Maybe. So what I thought, I just wanted to talk about a couple of sort of general things before I go on to the next stage of the waistcoat. Based on, a couple of snafus that we've had here this morning. So when you're sewing something at the machine, sometimes you do what you think is a really nice curve, really nice armhole, or really nice straight centre front, and then you flip it over. And if you have a look at the underside, you'll see that you've gone wonky. It sounds the most basic thing in the world, but because of the way in which your sewing machine works, and you've got a thread on the top and a thread on the bottom, don't just trust yourself with what's going on the top. Flip it over and have a look, because as I said, we had a wonky armhole, we had a wonky centre front. So just try and get in the habit of doing that, and it will help. At the risk of sounding like, your parents or something, it actually doesn't take terribly much longer to do things properly. And accuracy is really important. And I think you found that when you were doing I hope you found that when you were doing the pockets, that you absolutely had to sew straight lines. You had to clip right into those points. You had to stop and start at, on the very end of the welt. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work. So what I've done here is from this morning, I've got my 2 waistcoat fronts, and I have trapped them inside the lining. So I've trapped them on the shoulder seam, and then I've also stitched my back armhole, but my front is completely free. So I've just stitched my back fabric and my back lining together, and these are completely free. Now, if I try and pull it through, you'll see that at the shoulder, it's absolutely fine, because the shoulder's a nice straight line. So if I flip it over, you can see, here's my Chinese neckline, and here's my 18th century or Mongolian waistline with my little step. And then next week we're going to put the collar onto this line here. But if you look here, if I try and straighten this up, it doesn't really want to do it because it's on a curve. So I wanted to, can you see how the fabric's sort of pulling there, and it's all getting bunched up and horrible, and I can't really make it go around the corner. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about clipping curves, because I think that's something that some people have got a little bit confused about. So hopefully you can see on this one here, if I hold it right up to the camera, sorry, not very good at this. So can you see, it looks like I've taken little V's out. So here's my lining, and this is my seam allowance on the inside here, this sort of denser white. It's why I've used this really nasty, thin white lining so you can see through it. It looks as though I've taken little V's out, and I absolutely haven't. All I did was snip to release the fabric, and the fabric has sort of, relaxed and found, it's like water finding its own level. So it's sort of opened itself out naturally, and you can see that this is kind of quite a curvy bit. So I've snipped in quite a lot, and you can see it's quite opened out. Whereas up here, towards the shoulder, this is not so curvy. So you can see that my little snips, I haven't bothered to do them so often, and they haven't opened out nearly so much. So I'm going to pull this inside out again. And I'm just going to clip into the curve. So I'm stopping about 2 or 3 mil from the seam line. And when I get up here, you can see this is quite curvy, but this is straight. So I really don't need to do so many snips up here. But you can see instantly that that is now going to sort of relax. Can you see how the fabric's kind of opening out there? So I'm going to clip the other side. And you'll find the same thing on your neck edge, on your Chinese, where you've dragged that one through. You're going to have to clip the curve there. So now when I pull this through, it's going to be much happier. And if I hold it up to the camera, you can see how it's opened up into little V's. But you saw that I didn't cut these out of it. I just snipped it just to release it because it's under tension. So hopefully that's going to help. So whenever you have a curve like that, you've got to clip it. It's just the same as when you do your little step here, that we had to trim that off at 45 degrees. We had to get rid of all that extra bulk. And we had to clip right next to the point, just like we did when we were doing our welts for our welt pockets, because if you don't do that, you'll just get a horrible sort of lumpy corner and it just won't work properly. So having turned this through, I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to press the seam allowance, and I'm going to press all the seam allowance going in towards the lining side. Generally, you're always going to press things going to the wrong side of the garment, so to speak. So you can see I've pressed all the seam allowance going towards the lining. And it's really good to see so many people, actually queuing for the iron. I drove somebody nuts this morning by repeatedly saying the iron is your friend, the iron is your friend. But it is. If you press things properly, you can actually see what you're doing. So having pressed my seam allowance towards the back, I'm now going to go and repress, because you can see here, because this is my front armhole, this has been pressed nice and flat, but on the back it's still a bit sort of curvy and lumpy, so I'm just going to give that a press. And if you look and see how I've pressed it, can you see there's just the tiniest little bit of my top fabric showing? It's like 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres on the when I look at the wrong side, when I look inside the garment, looking at the lining. Because I pressed all my seam allowance in the one direction first, it enabled me to get this edge really nice and sharp. And by just slightly rolling it in your fingers and just having 1 millimetre or 2 of the top fabric showing, it means that I'm absolutely not seeing any of my lining on the outside of the garment, and that's what we want. It just gives it a really nice finish. So there we are. We can see how it's starting to look like a waistcoat. So here's my two fronts, here's my back, here's my neckline for my Chinese, here's my neckline for my Mongolian on my 18th century. I've got a nice finished armhole. So the next thing to do is to do up the side seams. So just check that you're joining the right front to the right back and the left front to the left back. Yeah. So what, and I've got marked here, this little white line here, and this little white line here, and this mark on my lining, and this mark on my lining here. Those are for my vents, my little slits inside. And they are marked on your pattern. This is the Chinese pattern. There's a little notch there and it says vent, and that should be on all the patterns. So, lots of different ways of doing the next stage, but this is the way that I suggest you do it because I think it's going to be the least fiddly, and also it means you don't have to clip into the fabric. So, I'm going to join my lining to my lining, and my top fabric to my top fabric. Yeah? So once again, here's my front lining, here's my back lining, here's my back fabric. So I open it out, and I open that out, and I join them together.
How does this work if you've already backed through the bottom hem of the back, if you're doing it with this?
It works in exactly the same way. I'll show you at the end. I'll do the hem up and I'll show you. So I've got a pin, and I'm absolutely, this is my stitching line. Yeah, you can see better on that side because of white stitching. So I've got a pin in there and I'm pinning them together, and because I've pressed my seam allowance and I've pressed the seam allowance all in the same direction, it makes my life easier. So here's my vent, start of my vent. Here's the start of the vent on the other side. So I'm going to put a pin through there. And then I'm going to carry on into the lining. So again, I'm stopping at the point where the vent is. Okay. So effectively, here's the outside. Here's the inside. Yeah. So I'm just going to machine that. they can see it's one continuous stitching line from the vent point and keeping all the seam allowance going in the same direction. And I open it up and it looks like that, so I'm going to press that. That's not terribly good, that's actually a couple of mil off there, and in an ideal world, can you see? In an ideal world they should be absolutely together. So there we go, like that. And then you just fold it down. So that's my side seam and my lining, and I've done them all in one go. So I'm just going to press that. Now, if I were doing a waistcoat where the back is in double lining, effectively, so not a top fabric and a lining, but two lots of lining, we talked about hemming the lining by machine first. So I'm just going to pin this together. Sorry, can't hear you.
We did before sewing the side seam.
I think I normally do, but you can. I think you can do that hem afterwards. I think you can do the hem afterwards. You might find it easier to do it afterwards, thinking about it. So here's the other side. So imagine that this hem has been stitched. You can still use exactly the same technique. It's just slightly fiddlier. So I've got my hem finished here, but this is still open. So I'm going to match at the underarm. You know how I was talking about looking at the underside of the work? So even as I'm pinning it, I'm turning it over and making sure that I'm in the right place underneath. So there we are. I can still do it, even with my hem done up. I can still do this seam in one go. I can machine from there to there. Yep. Does that answer your question? There you go. Yeah, you might find it easier to do the hem after you've done the side seam.
If we do the hem afterwards, then would we have to turn it all through again?
Yes. I don't know. Let me see. I'll tell you. Mm? So that's been sewn together like that, hasn't it? So so imagine, so here's my one side seam that's been machined, here's my other side seam that's been machined. My hems are free. So I'll pin my hems together. So I would stitch my hem, the right side's inside, and then I would pull it through. Pull it through like that. So actually I think I was pulling it through here because my front hem is still open and I can get inside here. It's actually the side seam if you look. Yeah, and here. So just as long as you trap everything inside, it's fine. You just have to have a hole somewhere. Is that okay? Has that confused everybody utterly? That's really only applying if you're doing a waistcoat where your back is just in lining, your back's in a sort of cheaper fabric. So probably the 18th century, well, I think definitely the 18th century one. I think somebody's doing a Mongolian one with the backs in, both the backs in lining. I'll see you this afternoon. There we go. So as I said this morning, there's lots of different ways of pulling a waistcoat through. So, I mean, a traditional modern waistcoat, they would probably have finished the back hem, finished the front hem, and actually bagged through this little corner up to the vent, and they would trap everything through the side, trap everything in the side seam, just like we trap the fronts in the shoulder seam. They would also trap the side seam on the between the back top fabric and the back lining. But if you do that, you have to kind of clip right in to make your vent nice and square. And so I prefer to do it this way because it means that potentially I can alter the waistcoat. I can let it out on this seam much more easily. And I also think it's giving you a bit more space to work with, and I think it's going to be easier for you to see. So I'm suggesting that you do your seam up this way, and we're then going to finish, certainly we're going to finish the front hem by hand, And in the case of the most people who are doing the Chinese waistcoat and the Mongolian waistcoat, you're going to finish your back hem by hand because you're using wool. It's kind of quite nicely behaved. Your stitches won't really show, particularly on the fronts. You've got the canvas, so you can actually, stitch into your canvas when you do the hem. So the first thing I want to do with my vents is I want to get really nice sharp corners. So I'm actually going to mitre the corner, as it's called. So I'm going to go at 45 degrees. Can you all see this? Is that okay? Here is my vent, here is my hem. So it's pretty much a right angle. So I'm folding absolutely from that point, I'm folding diagonally across like that at 45 degrees. And I would go and press that. And then I can fold this in like that, and this up like that. And I've got a nice sharp corner. And if I do the back, it's going to be the same. So on the front, here's my side seam and here's my little vents. And hopefully they're exactly the same length. And so you can just draw those edges together to keep it nice and crisp. And then you're going to turn your hem up. And you spent lots of time doing all that tailor's tacking, all that mark stitching to show you the exact finishing lines. So do actually use those lines. We did have a few issues this morning, as I said, with either only looking at one side of the work, so looking at the top side and not looking at the underside and seeing what's going on sort of beneath the surface, or people just not really bothering to match their markings up, and that's just daft really, because you spend a lot of time and trouble putting them in and they're there to help you. So try and be accurate, try and line things up. So I've pinned a hem like that, and so I'm gonna, if I'm using top fabric, if I'm using the wool, if I'm got my back and my front in the same fabric, I'm just going to hem them by hand. And you can do a little slip stitch, I would probably use a herringbone stitch because I think it helps to keep everything sitting a little bit flatter. So herringbone stitch, just like you did when you were catching the seam allowance onto your canvas to hold it in place, because herringbone, it keeps it flatter and it helps to distribute the fullness a little bit more easily. Because if you look particularly on the Chinese and Mongolian waistcoats, our hem is actually a little bit curved, it's not completely straight. So this edge is actually going to be slightly bigger than here, which is where it's going to end up when it's finished. So you're going to hem that, and then you're very simply going to bring your lining down. So the point at which you stopped and started, where your vent is, should be exactly the same on the lining as on the top fabric. And you can see I've marked in the hemline on the lining. So again, I'm going to mitre the corner because it's less bulky, and press that. I'm going to go and press that now, actually. So there we are, my mitered corner, my hem pressed up, my seam allowances pressed open. So I'm going to stitch my hem by hand. And then with the lining, again, we don't want to see the lining sagging below the bottom of the waistcoat or anything like that. So I match up the points at which my vent in my lining and my top fabric. And if you've done your tailor's tacking and you're marking accurately, they should completely match. I've pressed in on my marked edge, the hem also on the lining, but I'm just going to set that a little tiny bit up. Like that. I mean, that's about 1 centimetre, but you can really do what you like. I'm going to pin it a little bit closer to the edge. Now, obviously, because I've moved the lining in a tiny bit here, so this lining is the same size, the facing plus the lining is the same size as this. By moving this in, I've actually got a tiny, weeny little bit of extra fabric, but you can just ease that in when you stitch. And then if I stroke it down, you can see that it's just going to form that sort of extra. I've got a little bit of extra fabric because instead of matching this line absolutely to the bottom hem, because I've moved it up, I've got this little extra bit, and it's just going to form a nice little pleat like that. And it just gives us a little bit of room in the lining, and it means that we're not going to see anything from the right side of the fabric. And I'm just going to slip stitch. And I'm going to slip stitch down here and leave that little bottom bit free, and then slip stitch along there, and it will automatically form this little pleat like that. And there we go. We've got something that is actually finally starting to look a bit like a finished waistcoat. Yeah? Any questions? Wow. Yeah, all good?
I'm just going to go through a little bit of research just to make sure that we're clear on what you're doing. I would usually show you examples of what's come in the past, but given that it's a new unit, I have no prior students examples to show you. So I'm going to show you some Unit 5 examples. So that will be last year or the year before. No, just bear with.
I'll just show you that slip stitch. Oh no, I can't because Josh is looking for other things on the screen. Actually, can I ask a stupid question? What is the research element of this project?
You're about to find out. Okay, sorry, I've got the wrong year. My bad. I've been here too long. I'll be just another 1 minute. Yeah, okay. This is the back door you probably wish you had access to. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you're going to be, as we've already laid out, producing research which pertains to the intersection of tailoring and the Silk Road. Yeah, is that already all clear? Use that as large a definition as you wish to. I'm not too concerned by what it is you're researching. And I make it intentionally lax throughout the years, because what I don't want to do is be forcing you, funneling you down a knowledge stream which you're not particularly interested in. So if you want to be quite abstract with how you interpret this, or interpret it in so far as going down a contemporary rabbit hole, then that's fine as well. And we'll come up with ideas as we go along. But what I'm looking for, and I'm not looking for quantity either, this can be done quite easily with a half a day of gathering information, a half a day of reading, and maybe another half a day of gathering this. So it's a fairly quick thing that I want you to do, but I want you to do it well. And what I'm looking for primarily is some kind of critical analysis, some attempt to uncover maybe a question which might not be quite so obvious to start off with. So I'll show you what constitutes a good amount of gathering. I'm not asking you to gather this amount. Again, I can't show you anything that prior students have done because it's a new unit. So this is going to be far more extensive than what I'm asking from you. But it's just to show you what I'm asking for in terms of the variety of resources and what collating that information in a good fashion looks like. And then we're going to look at another bit of research, which asks a great question, but doesn't delve deeply enough into that information to sufficiently answer the question. So this is Eve, who got an A+, but she got an A+ by and large for the extent of what she was gathering. And so she, again, this has nothing to do with what you're doing, but the premise for this was for the students to perform tailoring research as they saw fit. So it's even more broad than what you're looking at. And what she did was simply look at tailoring through time through the lens of individuals or movements. And you can see that she's looking at film, she's looking at literature, she's looking into music, she's gone to museums, she's gone to our archive, she's looking at fashion, she's got a variety of resources. She's plucked from as broad a spectrum of literature and other resources as she possibly can. And that's the aim. You should be looking at primary, secondary, and extant in order to inform whatever it is you're uncovering. So this is great insofar as she's absorbed all that information successfully. However, it's a bit of a boring approach in that it doesn't really uncover anything novel. Again, I'm not asking you to write a thesis, but I'm asking you at least to try and think about something which might be slightly novel. This is just a chronology of tailoring through the lens of individuals and movements. This, on the other hand, is Ji Young. And Ji Young's topic was really interesting, but you'll see quite quickly that she uncovered very little. Again, there's too little content here to really answer the question that she was attempting to. But what she was trying to look at, it's quite hard to decipher given how short it is, was how the arrival of the lounge coat into her country of origin, Korea, South Korea, how that happened and how it integrated within indigenous dress and what that intersection looked like and what it meant sociopolitically. That's an interesting topic, okay? But it's going nowhere, given how little she's uncovered. So you've got both spectrums here, and I'm trying to get you to maybe fuse those two. I'm not looking for, again, something extensive. I'm looking for a day's worth of reading and maximum a day's worth of collating. That's it. Okay. So don't like tie yourselves out, but just find something that you're interested in and try and go a little deep. Yeah. Any questions? Yes.
So, is it basically that we're like finding a specific topic or like a specific question that relates to like waistcoats on the Silk Road?
It doesn't have to be waistcoats. It has to be somehow tailoring related and somehow Silk Road related. If it were up to me, I would provide you no framework and say go and have fun. But we're working within the parameters of the unit. So I'm being as lax as I can within this. So if you were like, oh, well, I'm quite interested in how that period of mercantilism in the Orient might have impacted contemporary fashion practices, go for it. And if you want to look at contemporary runway and feed that back into historical dress from that period and of that era, that's fine. You've loosely timed it in. Yeah. Again, I'm being broad. Yes.
So the chapters on the brief suggest that you have to write something about your waistcoat and a general history of waistcoats.
Does it?
Wow. Yeah, so that's what it says in the brief. Should we scrap that?
Let me. I didn't write that on the brief. So if that's on the brief, it may be a later edition. Let me double check that.
While Josh is looking for that, I mean, I found that really interesting, actually, particularly what you were saying about the Korean student and looking at the kind of intersection between, about how, traditional Western dress was then introduced to the country and how it was sort of filtered and how it then worked out. And I went to a fantastic exhibition in a place called Prato in Italy a couple of years ago. Prato is the absolute centre of the rag trade, of the textile trade in Italy, and they have a big museum there, which is very, very interesting. Actually, a lot of the major developments in cloth manufacture and whatever were British in origin, and they had quite a lot of British examples of different tools and equipment and things there. But there was a particular exhibition when I was there, which was about kimonos. And I know some people completely love kimonos. They don't really float my boat. But what was so interesting was that you've got these kimonos, these traditional Japanese shapes, but they had taken Western influences in the design, in the fabric, and some of them were really quite bizarre. So I remember I've got photos on my phone if anyone wants to come and have a look, but there was one that had swastikas all over it. There was one that had aeroplanes, and there was an obi with a huge, great cruise liner. I mean, we really wouldn't, I think, make a Western style dress with, swastikas on or aeroplanes or whatever, but seeing how they kind of taken somebody else's culture and sort of slightly misinterpreted